Night fell over the riverside village, and the wind hissed through the brittle trees like the cries of forgotten souls. For generations, the people here have whispered of a curse. A woman in white, her eyes bleeding with sorrow, wandering the water's edge, wailing a cry that could tear the heart from your chest. They call her La Llorona, the weeping woman. But before she became the ghost that haunts the living, she was Maria, a strikingly beautiful young woman, proud and passionate, carrying within her both love and wounds that would never heal. Her story isn't just a folk tale meant to frighten children. It is a tragedy written in blood and tears, where jealousy festered into madness, and a mother's love was strangled by despair. Since that night, Maria's cries are not only for the children she lost, but for anyone unlucky enough to hear her in the dark. And if you ever hear that mournful call by the river, pray that you are not the next to answer it. The river was never silent. Even on the stillest nights, when the desert wind held its breath and the stars seemed nailed in place above the black hills, the water carried whispers. Some swore it was only the current slipping over stones. Others said it was something older, something that belonged to the dead. Children in the village were told never to wander near the banks after sundown. Parents warned them with the same words, heavy with fear. If you hear her cry, don't answer, don't look, don't follow. They called her La Llorona, the weeping woman. But before she became a ghost draped in white, before her hollow wails rattled through the mesquite trees, she was simply Maria. Maria had been the pride of her town, a girl whose beauty turned heads and sparked jealous whispers. Her hair fell black as midnight, her smile lit fires in men's hearts, and her laughter used to echo brighter than church bells. When she married a man of wealth, people said she had captured her fate with both hands. For a time, she lived as if inside a dream. Fine clothes, a home by the river, and 2 children whose eyes mirrored her own. Yet dreams have edges sharp enough to cut. The man she loved grew distant. His touch cooled, his gaze wandered, and soon the gossip began. Maria saw him with another woman, softer and younger, laughing in the streets where neighbors could see. Rage spread through her veins like wildfire. Shame pressed heavy on her chest. And in that fever of betrayal, her love twisted into something monstrous. That night, the river carried more than whispers. Maria's screams tore through the dark as she dragged her children to the water's edge. Their small hands clutched at her dress, their voices trembled with confusion. But Maria was blind to their fear. All she saw was her husband's face, smiling at another. All she heard was the sound of betrayal. And with one final cry, a cry that still lingers in every story, she cast her children into the river's black mouth. The splash echoed like thunder. When silence fell, it was broken only by the river, and by Maria's own voice, shrieking with horror at what she had done. She clawed at the banks, tore her skin on roots and stone, but the water gave nothing back. Her children were gone. By dawn, so was Maria. What rose in her place was not a woman, not anymore. It was a shadow in white, with eyes that bled grief, and a voice that could chill the marrow of any soul unlucky enough to hear it. And so the whispers spread. If you walked by the river at night, you might hear her weeping. If you saw her, it would already be too late. For La Llorona does not forgive. She does not forget. She wanders still, searching for her lost children, or for yours. The river changed after that night. Villagers swore the water ran colder, even in summer. Dogs refused to drink from it, and cattle shied away, lowing nervously if herons took flight too quickly from the reeds. People whispered that the river was cursed, that it carried more than mud and fish in its depths. Then came the cries. At first, only one old man claimed to hear them. He lived alone at the edge of town, near the bend where the current dragged hardest. One morning he stumbled into the plaza, pale as chalk, shaking so badly he dropped the rosary in his hands. He said he had heard a woman's voice calling through the mist, her sobs thin and desperate. The others laughed it off until the children began to vanish. The first was a boy of 6, last seen chasing fireflies along the water's edge. His mother said she had turned her back for only a moment. She heard a splash, a giggle, then nothing. By the time the men rushed to the river with lanterns, there was no trace, not even footprints in the mud. 2 weeks later, a girl disappeared from her bed. The shutters had been left open, and her blanket was damp as though she had been dragged through water. Neighbors whispered of white fabric drifting beyond the tree line, a shape that melted back into the darkness before anyone dared to follow. No one laughed after that. By candlelight, families told their children the warning again and again: do not listen if she calls. Do not follow her voice. Yet children are curious, and fear has its own strange magnetism. Some swore they had seen her from afar, a tall woman in a wedding dress, her veil soaked and trailing like seaweed, her face hidden but her wailing clear as broken glass. The priests tried to bless the river, but the holy water turned bitter on their tongues. A fisherman who mocked the tale drowned the very next dawn, his boat found split in half as though struck by unseen hands. And so the village learned to live with her, the shadow in white who haunted the current. They barred their windows, they prayed twice as hard, and every night as the sun slid beneath the hills, the same sound returned, thin, mournful, and unrelenting. The sound of a mother searching for children she could never find. La Llorona's cry. Mateo had always been a restless child. 10 years old, with a heart too curious for his own good, he never believed in the ghost stories the elders told by firelight. Monsters were for babies. Shadows were only tricks of the moon. But that summer, when the air hung heavy and no rain fell for weeks, the river whispered louder than ever. Every night, the sound of weeping drifted through the village, thin as smoke, carrying across the dust-choked fields. Most children buried their heads under blankets when it came. Mateo instead pressed his ear to the open shutters and listened. On the 7th night, he decided to follow it. The moon was a sickle of white, cutting through the sky. The village slept. He slipped out barefoot, the ground cool beneath his soles, and crept toward the water. Each step tightened the knot in his chest, but still he went, as though the cry itself had hooked his ribs and was reeling him in. When he reached the bend of the river, he saw her. At first, she was only a pale shimmer in the mist, swaying back and forth. Then the fog thinned, and Mateo's breath froze. A woman in white stood ankle-deep in the water, her gown drifting around her like smoke. Her hair hung in a black curtain, dripping, tangled. She was weeping into her hands, the sound so raw it felt like his own mother's heartbreak. Nino. The word tore from her throat like glass. Child. Mateo's knees buckled. It was not a scream, not a threat, but a plea. His body wanted to run, but his feet sank deeper into the mud. She lifted her face, and for a heartbeat he thought she was beautiful, skin pale as porcelain, lips trembling. Then he saw her eyes. They were hollow, black pits streaming with blood. The scream that rose from her chest was not human. It rattled the trees, split the air, and sent birds shrieking from their roosts. Mateo fell backward, clawing at the ground. The river seemed to surge toward him, water licking his ankles, as though invisible hands were dragging him in. Then just as suddenly it stopped. The woman was gone. The water stilled. Only the echo of her cry remained, rolling down the valley like thunder. Mateo scrambled to his feet and ran until his lungs burned, until the safety of the village lights flickered before him. When he tried to speak of what he had seen, no voice came out. His throat was raw, scraped clean by terror. For 3 days, Mateo could not utter a word, and when his voice finally returned, it carried only one sentence, whispered over and over, even in his sleep. "She was looking for me." After Mateo's encounter, the village changed. By day, people whispered his name with pity, crossing themselves when he passed. By night, they barred their doors with planks and nails, hung rosaries over their windows, and burned incense until the air turned choking thick. Still, none of it stopped her. The cries grew louder. Sometimes they came from the fields, sometimes from the churchyard, and sometimes, God help them, from just outside the walls of their homes. Mothers clutched their children tighter, whispering prayers through chattering teeth. Men who once laughed at ghost tales now drank themselves numb before dusk, afraid of what they might hear when the dark rolled in. It was Don Ernesto, the blacksmith, who vanished next. He had mocked the villagers for cowering. "If she's out there," he said, "let her come for me. My hammer will break her spine." That night, neighbors woke to the sound of pounding, iron against stone, or perhaps something softer. They found his forge cold, the coals dead. The next morning, his hammer lay by the riverbank, bent nearly in half as though gripped by hands not human. Don Ernesto himself was never seen again. Then came the night of the procession. The villagers had gathered, desperate, clutching candles as the priest led them to the river. Latin prayers into the wind, trembling as holy water was flung across the black surface. For a moment, silence followed, deep, heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Then the candles went out. All of them. Darkness swallowed the crowd. From the river rose a sound so piercing it split eardrums, a wail that was not just sorrow, but rage. Women screamed, children wailed, men dropped their crosses and fled. In the flicker of lightning, they saw her standing on the water itself, veil streaming behind her, gown spreading wide like a funeral shroud. The priest raised his crucifix. His voice broke halfway through the blessing. And then she opened her mouth. It was not words that came out, but a torrent of water. Black, churning, it gushed forth as though the river itself was pouring from her throat. The priest stumbled backward, coughing, his cassock soaked through. When the lightning flashed again, she was gone. Only the river remained, but its banks had risen a full foot higher. That night, the village knew two truths. La Llorona no longer wanted only children, and the river was hungrier than ever. By the time autumn came, the village was hollow. Doors swung on broken hinges, chapels stood empty, and the streets where children once played lay silent under a crust of dust. Families fled in the night, carrying what little they could, unwilling to risk another cry drifting from the river. Those who stayed behind became gaunt and haunted, their eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights, their ears straining for every sound. The river no longer whispered. It demanded. Cattle were found drowned in shallow pools, their bodies twisted as though dragged down by unseen hands. Travelers spoke of a pale woman who walked the roads at dusk, her gown trailing wet footprints across the dirt that vanished before morning. Some swore they heard knocks at their doors, 3 at a time, followed by the faint voice of a child calling, "Mama." Word spread beyond the valley. Merchants carried the tale to neighboring towns, and from there it slithered across the deserts and mountains, changing with each tongue, but always circling back to the same truth. The weeping woman does not stay where she is born. She wanders. She follows. One night, decades later, a family settled by a new river on the far edge of the frontier. They knew nothing of the old village, nothing of the curse. But their youngest daughter woke screaming, claiming she had seen a lady outside her window, tall, in a white dress, her face blurred by tears. The parents hushed her, whispering prayers, rocking her back to sleep. But when dawn came, they found her bed empty, the sheets damp, her footprints leading straight to the water's edge. And stopping there. And so the story begins again, passed from parent to child, campfire to campfire. If you hear her voice, do not answer. If you see her veil, do not follow. For La Llorona still walks, searching, weeping, taking. Her cry does not fade, it waits for you.